Welcome to the Explainer. Today we're diving into a really heart-wrenching legal case out of the Philippines. It asks a pretty tough question. What's the line between a supposed act of kindness and the serious crime of kidnapping? We're going to follow a mother's agonizing search for her son, a search that led to a truly landmark court decision.
I mean, just listen to that quote from the Supreme Court of the Philippines. It's powerful stuff, and it really sets the stage for the story about a lost child and the incredible 16-month ordeal his family was forced to endure. It's a case that really tested the limits of the law.
So, we're going to explore how this one single event, a child disappearing, just spiraled into this incredibly complex legal fight, a fight that went all the way to the nation's highest court and actually set a crucial legal precedent. Okay, let's get into the details. To really get a handle on this case, we're going to walk through it just like a legal digest. We'll start with the facts, then look at the two very different stories told in court, dig into the core legal issues, and finally, break down the court's ultimate ruling and the legal principle it created.
So, let's begin with the timeline of events. This is the foundation for the entire case. These are the facts that completely shattered a family.
Just try to imagine the silence. For over a year, 14 months, Christopher's mother, Teresa, heard absolutely nothing. Then, out of nowhere, a chilling phone call demanding 30,000 pesos. That call kicks off this frantic police-assisted operation that would take her from Manila all the way down to Mindanao, all in a desperate search for her son.
And the reunion, after 16 long months, it was just profoundly bittersweet. The little 2-year-old boy who disappeared was almost 4 now. He didn't even recognize his own mother. He couldn't speak Tagalog anymore. They'd given him a completely new name. It just shows you the deep, transformative impact of that separation.
So, in court, you get two drastically different stories to explain those 16 months. Let's take a look at how the prosecution and the defense each framed what happened to little Christopher.
And this is what's so fascinating. The contrast could not be more stark. The prosecution said, look, this was a clear-cut case of kidnapping for ransom, a malicious, calculated crime. The defense, on the other hand, tried to paint this picture of a benevolent act, just finding a lost child and caring for him.
So the defendant's story goes like this. One sister, Ligad Torak, claims she just found Christopher wandering around, tried to find a police officer but couldn't, and so just decided to take him home and care for him herself. The other sister, Rega Mamantak, claimed her being at the money exchange was just a complete coincidence.
Yeah, the court found that story completely unbelievable, and this quote from the decision just perfectly captures their disbelief. It's basically saying the excuse is like finding a rope and taking it home, pretending you didn't notice the giant cow tied to the other end. The judges basically asked, why, in over 16 months, did you never once go to the authorities?
Okay, so with these two totally conflicting stories, the court had to go straight to the letter of the law to figure this out. This is where we get to the absolute core legal question, starting with the very definition of the crime itself. Under Article 267 of the Revised Penal Code, the essence of kidnapping is pretty simple. It's the actual deprivation of a victim's liberty and the intent to do it. It doesn't have to be a violent abduction. It can be any act that illegally takes away someone's freedom. So for the prosecution to prove kidnapping, they had to check 4 boxes. 1, was the offender a private citizen? Check. 2, did they deprive someone of their liberty? Check. 3, was the act illegal? Absolutely, check. And 4, was there a special circumstance? A huge one, the victim was a minor. All the elements were there.
But this question became the absolute center of the whole case, because the answer would have massive implications for the penalty. Kidnapping for ransom carries the highest possible punishment you can get under the law.
So, how did the courts answer that critical question? Let's track the journey of this case as it moved right up the judicial ladder.
You can see it was a real roller coaster. The trial court gave them reclusion perpetua, which is basically life imprisonment. Then, the Court of Appeals bumped it up to the death penalty. But finally, the Supreme Court brought it back down to life in prison. This whole back and forth hinged entirely on how they interpreted that 30,000 peso demand.
And this brings us to the core legal principle, or doctrine, that this case established. How exactly does the law define the word ransom?
This slide just illustrates it perfectly. The lower court thought 30,000 pesos was too measly to be ransom, that it was more like a reimbursement for taking care of the kid. But the Supreme Court set a totally different standard. They said the actual amount doesn't matter one bit. What matters is the purpose of the demand.
The Supreme Court made it crystal clear.
Legally, ransom is any money you demand as a bargaining chip for a person's freedom. Since that 30,000 pesos was a condition to get Christopher back, it was, by definition, ransom. That settled the issue once and for all.
With that key legal point settled, the Supreme Court found the accused guilty of kidnapping for ransom. So now, let's look at the final verdict, what's called the disposition, and the damages they had to pay.
So the Supreme Court affirmed the conviction. Now you might be wondering, wait, if it was kidnapping for ransom, why life in prison and not death? Well, that's because in 2006, while this case was still going on, the Philippines passed a law that abolished the death penalty. So all death sentences were automatically changed to life imprisonment without parole.
And this is really crucial. The court also significantly increased the moral damages they had to pay. This wasn't just about money. This was the court's way of formally recognizing the immense psychological and emotional damage this crime caused, both to a very young child and to his family.
And this case really leaves us with a critical question, doesn't it? It perfectly shows the tension between strict black and white legal definitions, like what counts as ransom, and the very real, unquantifiable human suffering that happens in these cases. It really forces you to think about the true price of a stolen childhood, and how our laws even begin to deliver justice in its wake.